Have you ever realized too late that someone you trusted was hiding something right where you lived? For as long as I can remember, my father's workshop was off limits. It was always locked, the windows covered with thick curtains or boards, and no one in the family was ever allowed inside. I never questioned it at first. I thought it was just his private space, a place for fixing things, building small projects, and maybe escaping the noise of the house for a few quiet hours. But at night, when everyone else was asleep, I would sometimes pass by that door. Even when the lights were off inside, I could hear the faint hum of tools running. There was always this sharp chemical smell hanging in the air, like paint thinner or something stronger I couldn't name. The grinding of metal, the occasional clatter of something falling, it all felt strange, out of place in a house that was supposed to be safe. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was normal for someone like my dad to be protective of his space. Maybe he was working on something special, a secret project he didn't want to share yet. But the sounds and smells wouldn't stop. Sometimes, I'd stand outside that locked door, heart pounding, wondering what he was really doing in there. The feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing year. I wanted to believe in the dad I knew, the one who coached my little league games, fixed the leaky faucet, and told me stories at bedtime. But deep down, a part of me was scared. One night, everything changed. I was home alone when I heard a knock at the front door. When I opened it, 2 detectives were standing there, a warrant in hand. They didn't say much, just that they needed to search the workshop. I felt frozen, unable to speak. This was the first time I was going to see inside that locked room. The place my father had kept hidden for so many years was about to be revealed. And I had no idea what I was about to walk into. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to settle in. There's more unfolding here than meets the eye. What lies behind that door isn't just a room, it's a chapter of my family's history that's been sealed away, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Stick around, because the details you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew. It's one of those moments where every second counts, and the story is far from over. Let's see what secrets the workshop holds, and how they'll reshape the path ahead. The workshop door always had that heavy, cold padlock clamped across its latch, the kind that clicked sharply and echoed faintly down the hallway when my father secured it. The metal's chill pressed against my palm whenever I dared to touch it, and the lock's rough edges scraped softly against my skin, a reminder that this was a boundary not meant to be crossed. Behind that door was a world wrapped in thick layers of scent, the sharp, biting smell of chemicals that stung my nostrils and lingered in the air like a ghost. It was a strange mixture of varnishes, solvents, and something almost metallic, a scent that crept into my clothes and refused to let go for hours after I'd been near. Inside, I could hear it sometimes, even when the door was closed tight. The saw's roar was a relentless grinding noise that vibrated through the walls, a harsh mechanical scream that cut through the quiet of the house like a warning. It was loud enough to make my ears ring, a steady buzz punctuated by the sharp, sudden shreds of wood being sliced. Whenever I was close to the door, the noise seemed to pulse stronger, as if the workshop was alive and breathing just on the other side. My father's reaction whenever someone came too near was immediate and tense. His eyes would narrow, sharp and watchful, and his voice would drop to a low, firm growl. "Stay back," he'd say, placing a hand on the door or the wall beside it, as if physically pushing us away. "This is just my space to relax." The words were always the same, repeated like a mantra, but the tone never softened. It was as if those few words were meant to shut down any questions before they could even form. As a child, I didn't understand it. The door was like a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere in the picture of my family. I could see the workshop was important to him, but why did it have to be so secret? The smell was confusing. Sometimes it was almost sickening, other times oddly comforting, like the scent of a storm just before it breaks. I remember pressing my ear against the cold wood, trying to catch a hint of what he was working on, what made that room so different. But all I heard was the relentless saw and his sharp voice warning me away. When I was a teenager, my confusion deepened into frustration. I questioned his rules in my head, wondering if just his space to relax was really the whole story or just a shield to keep us out. The padlock felt like a barrier not just to the workshop, but to understanding him, to reaching into a part of his life that was locked tight and hidden. The chemical smell still clung to my memories, a strange, constant reminder of all the things I wasn't allowed to see. And the saw, that endless grinding saw, became a symbol of the distance between us, the noise of something being carved away that I could never touch or hold. Then there was that one night. I was lying in bed when I heard it again, the saw, roaring to life in the dark. But my father was inside the house, sitting quietly in the living room just down the hall. The noise wasn't muffled or faint, it was clear and steady, cutting through the silence like a blade. I froze, heart pounding, caught between the sound and the knowledge that he wasn't in the workshop. The padlock was still on the door the next morning, as always. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time, that the workshop wasn't just a place to relax anymore, and that maybe, just maybe, whatever secrets it held had started to stir on their own. The first time I noticed the smell, it was faint, something chemical, sharp and acrid, like bleach mixed with gasoline. It drifted from the workshop late in the afternoon, curling into the kitchen window just as I was washing the dishes. I asked him about it the next day, but he only shrugged, saying he'd been cleaning the tools and must have spilled something. That was plausible enough. After all, the workshop was always a mess, filled with half-finished projects and cans of paint thinner. I tried to push the thought away, but the chemical odor didn't stay faint for long. Over the months, it grew stronger, especially in the evenings. Sometimes it mingled with the scent of burnt wood, smoky, dry, and unmistakable, like someone had been burning scraps in a fire pit. Yet, every time I peered outside, the fire pit was cold and empty. He insisted he wasn't burning anything, just sanding and shaping wood. I wanted to believe him, though the smell told another story. Then, there was the metallic tang that crept in between the chemical and burnt wood odors. It was subtle, almost like the sting of iron on skin, but persistent. I realized it was coming from the workshop too. Maybe from the tools or the machines he used. I tried to rationalize it that way, telling myself that metal filings and dust could have created the smell. Maybe he was working with new materials, experimenting with metals I hadn't seen before. The sounds, however, were far harder to explain. At first, it was the faint hum of tools running late at night, grinders, sanders, or drills, buzzing steadily behind the locked door. I remembered how he often stayed late, working on quiet repairs or finishing up projects that had taken longer than expected. But then the noises began to shift. The tools would run at odd hours, like 2 or 3 in the morning, when he was supposedly asleep in bed. I confronted him once, asking if he'd been up in the middle of the night. He told me he hadn't and that the workshop door was locked tight. I checked myself. The padlock hung solid and undisturbed as always. Lights began turning on by themselves, too. I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the glow from the workshop window flickered on, bathing the yard in a pale yellow light. No footsteps, no creaks, just the lights buzzing to life. I suggested maybe the wiring was faulty or the timer was glitching, but the electrician we called found nothing. He even rewired the whole shed, yet the lights kept coming on at random times. The strangest part was how my daughter started noticing patterns. She told me she'd hear the sounds too, the rhythmic clinking and whirring, and that sometimes the smells would suddenly fill her room, even when the windows were closed. She looked at me with wide eyes and whispered that the workshop was alive, but I brushed it off as an overactive imagination. I needed to believe there was a logical explanation. For months, I told myself it was nothing more than old equipment acting up, maybe a raccoon or stray cat causing some mischief, or perhaps he was just overworking himself without telling me. The smells, the sounds, the lights, it had to be normal, even if it wasn't comfortable. But one night, everything changed. The chemical odor was so strong it didn't just hover near the workshop, it spread through the entire yard, thick and choking in the cool air. I stepped outside coughing, scanning the darkness, but there was no visible source. No smoke, no fire, no flickering light. Just that overwhelming scent, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs, wrapping around the house like a silent warning. I wanted to call him, but the line was dead. I wanted to run back inside, but something held me there, rooted to the spot, staring toward the workshop door that stayed firmly closed. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of a tool starting up, slow and deliberate, slicing through the night. My hand trembled as I reached for the padlock hanging heavy on the workshop door. The cold metal bit into my palm, rough and unyielding beneath my fingertips. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. The lock surface was pitted and worn, scarred by years of rust and weather, its coldness seeping through the thin skin of my fingers like an icy warning. I pressed my ear to the door, heart thudding in my chest, listening for any sign that my father might be nearby. The house was unervingly silent except for the faint hum of the distant streetlights outside. I gripped the shackle with both hands, twisting and pulling gently at first, then with more urgency. The door itself groaned softly, a deep, reluctant sound from the thick wood resisting the force. I could feel the stubbornness of the hinges beneath my palms, the way the door refused to give in easily, as if it held secrets it was determined to protect. My skin was clammy against the metal, the coolness spreading up my wrist, mixing with the sharp sting of adrenaline. Every minute movement felt magnified in the stillness. The lock didn't budge. I tried again, this time pressing my shoulder into the door, willing it to shift. The texture of the metal was coarse, marred by years of exposure, and tiny flakes of rust crumbled into my palm. I imagined what it would be like to finally open it, to peer inside the sanctuary my father had barred me from for so long. But the resistance was firm, and the weight of the lock seemed heavier with every second that passed. Fear curled inside me, a tightening knot that made my hands shake uncontrollably. What if he came back early? What if he caught me? The thought sent a cold spike down my spine. I was no stranger to his temper, and the consequences of being found here, meddling in his private world, could be worse than I dared imagine. My breath hitched, shallow and quick, as I strained to listen for any sound beyond the faint echo of my own heartbeat. Then, like a shadow slipping over the edge of my nerves, I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably close. The unmistakable crunch of gravel beneath heavy boots echoed from the gravel path leading to the workshop. Panic surged through me, sharp and relentless. I froze for a heartbeat, then bolted, tears pricking my eyes as I sprinted away from the door, the rough ground scraping my knees as I fell into the safety of the shadows. I didn't look back until I was hidden behind the corner of the house, chest heaving, every muscle trembling with fear and relief. The footsteps stopped at the workshop door. I could hear my father's voice, low and cold, muttering angrily. "Someone's been here," he said, his tone sharp with suspicion. "The lock's been moved." My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it, but still, I remained frozen in place. The door stood shut behind him, its secret still safe, at least for now. But I knew this was only the beginning. That night, the sounds from the workshop shattered the quiet like never before. I lay in my bed, the darkness pressing close, but my ears were wide awake. The familiar hum of the night was drowned out by the harsh grind of metal scraping against metal, sharp, relentless, and impossible to ignore. It was as if the very walls were trembling with the noise. I held my breath, eyes fixed on the faint glow slipping beneath my bedroom door, the flickering light casting strange shadows that danced across the hallway. Then came the strange clinks and clatters of tools I couldn't recognize, whirring and clicking in a way I hadn't heard before. Machines I didn't know were being operated in the dead of night, their rhythms erratic and unsettling. The flickering of the workshop lights grew worse, pulsing like a heartbeat out of sync, casting brief flashes of brightness that made the shadows leap wildly. Each flicker seemed to sync with the grinding, as though the room itself was alive and struggling. Fear coiled in my stomach, tightening its grip with every noise. I wanted to call out, to tell my father to stop whatever he was doing, but my voice stuck in my throat like a stone. The sharp metallic sounds felt angry, dangerous, as if the workshop held a secret too terrible to reveal. I pictured him inside, bent over his workbench, but the cold edge to his voice from earlier echoed in my mind, making me question everything I thought I knew about him. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The grinding slowed, then stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that seemed heavier than the noise before. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to catch any sound, but nothing came. The flickering lights finally steadied, bathing the hallway in a soft, steady glow. Exhausted, I lay back down, but sleep refused to come. Morning came too soon. The sun filtered weakly through my curtains, but the warmth I expected was missing. Downstairs, I heard the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of my father's voice, but something was off. When he finally appeared in the kitchen, his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a strange stiffness. His eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee. I tried to catch his attention, to ask about the night, but he brushed me off with a tight smile and vague reassurances. "Just some late work," he said, voice flat and unwilling to meet my gaze. Yet, his movements were jerky, almost mechanical, as if he were trying to hide something beneath his skin. That's when I saw it, the stain. A dark, irregular blotch on the cuff of his shirt, splattered in a way that didn't fit the neatness he usually maintained. The color wasn't right for oil or grease, and it looked fresh, almost wet. My heart skipped. When I looked up to question him, his face tightened, and he quickly folded his sleeve down, hiding the mark as if it were a secret too dangerous to reveal. His explanation was hurried and vague, just some paint from the workshop, nothing to worry about, but the unease in his eyes told me otherwise. The story didn't match the stain, and I felt a cold certainty that whatever happened last night was far more serious than I could have imagined. As he turned away, I noticed something else, a brief glimpse of something metallic tucked into his pocket, something unfamiliar and sharp. I wanted to ask, to demand answers, but the fear that had nested inside me the night before now rooted me to the spot. The truth was close, closer than ever, but so was the danger. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face either. The knock on the door was sharp and insistent, slicing through the quiet morning like a sudden crack of thunder. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my chest, as the sound echoed again, this time accompanied by the firm, authoritative voice of a man demanding entry. Through the frosted glass, I could just make out the silhouettes of two men standing side by side, their shoulders squared and their faces set in serious, unyielding lines. The kind of faces that left no room for argument or delay. My father was already moving, his whole body stiffening as if the air around him had turned suddenly colder. He opened the door before I could even think to stop him, and the detectives stepped inside without hesitation. One of them held up a thick envelope, unfolding it slowly to reveal a crisp, official-looking document. "Search warrant," the man said, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. "We need to inspect the workshop immediately." I watched my father's face change in a way that made my stomach drop. His usual calm, measured expression vanished, replaced by something taut and unreadable. His eyes flicked between the detectives and the warrant, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like resignation, or was it fear? There was a brief, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, and then he stepped back, as if stepping aside not by choice but by command. The tension in the room thickened. I felt it pressing down on me, a heavy silence punctuated only by the quiet shuffle of the detectives' boots on the floor. They didn't waste time with pleasantries or explanations. One of them moved toward the workshop door, which stood closed just down the hall, its lock gleaming faintly in the morning light streaming through the windows. I'd seen that door 1,000 times, but today it looked different, like a barrier not just to a room, but to everything my father had been keeping hidden. I wanted to ask what they were looking for. I wanted to understand why they had come here, to our home, so early and so serious. But the words caught in my throat. The room felt charged with unspoken things, the kind of secrets that claw at the edges of your mind, refusing to be ignored. One of the detectives pulled out a set of tools from his bag, glancing back at my father with a look that left no room for delay. "We're going to need to open this now," he said, voice firm but not unkind. My father nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the door, his hands clenched at his sides. I stepped forward, barely aware of my own movements, and found myself standing beside the workshop door. The detectives set to work immediately, the clicking and scraping of their tools sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet house. My breath caught in my throat as the lock resisted at first, then gave way with a sharp snap. The door creaked open, swinging inward on its hinges, revealing the dim, shadowed space beyond. And for a moment, everything seemed to freeze, the past, the secrets, the truth, all waiting silently in the darkness just inside. Stepping inside, I blinked against the dull light that filtered through a grimy window, casting long shadows across the cramped space. The air was thick with a strange mix of odors, faintly metallic, faintly chemical, and something earthy I couldn't quite place. My eyes darted around, trying to take it all in. The room was far from what I had imagined. This wasn't a workshop where creation blossomed, it was a place of dismantling, of taking things apart piece by piece. On rough wooden benches, rusted tools lay scattered among heaps of metal parts, springs, gears, wires, and tiny screws that looked as if they belonged to machines I had never seen before. Some pieces were carefully labeled with handwritten notes, their ink faded but still legible. Others were strewn about haphazardly, as if discarded mid-thought. I knelt to examine one pile closer, seeing fragments of what might have once been household appliances, but now reduced to unrecognizable components. The floor was a patchwork of sawdust mixed with strange powders and bits of broken glass. It crunched beneath my shoes, unsettling in its unfamiliarity. I ran my fingers along a thick layer of dust coating a worktable, uncovering an open notebook filled with sketches and cryptic annotations. The handwriting was my father's, but the contents were alien. Diagrams of devices that seemed impossible, charts plotting chemical reactions, and maps that didn't correspond to our neighborhood or any place I had ever heard of. Nearby, rows of glass containers stood on shelves, each holding liquids of various colors, some clear, others tinged with blues, greens, or murky browns. The labels were faded, their words half erased by time. A few jars contained powders or strange crystalline substances, their origins a mystery. I swallowed hard, the realization settling in that this room was not just a workshop, it was a hidden world, a secret my father had kept locked away from me and everyone else. What unsettled me most were the objects that clearly did not belong, not to this house, not to this town, not even to this country. A small carved mask from somewhere tropical, its wood dark and polished, a faded photograph tucked beneath a pile of circuit boards, showing a place I didn't recognize, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon, their language unfamiliar and looping in elegant script. Each item whispered stories I had no key to understand. I felt a sudden ache of confusion and betrayal. My father hadn't been building anything for us, for our home. He had been unraveling puzzles I couldn't begin to grasp, pulling things apart to uncover something hidden beneath their surfaces. But why? For whom? And what was the purpose of all this? Before I could dwell further, a sharp voice cut through the silence. One of the detectives crouched near the far corner, shining a flashlight under a heavy workbench. His beam fell upon something wrapped tightly in a grimy cloth, tucked away in a narrow crevice. He motioned urgently to the others, and as they gathered around, the weight of the moment pressed down on me. Whatever was hidden there, beneath the debris and dust, promised answers, and maybe more questions than I was prepared to face. The detective who had been crouching pulled the grimy cloth free, revealing a collection of small, carefully disassembled objects. He looked up, his eyes serious but patient. "We need to talk about what we found, and what it means." I nodded, though my throat felt tight, unsure if I was ready to hear this. He explained that my father had been collecting items from outside the house for quite some time. Not random things, but specific articles he'd find scattered in the neighborhood, things most people would overlook or throw away. Pieces of metal, scraps of wood, bits of fabric, and even parts of broken tools or toys. At first, I thought maybe he was just gathering junk, some old hobby or a strange kind of recycling. But the detective said it was far more deliberate than that. He wasn't just collecting these items, one detective said. He was altering them, dismantling them carefully, taking them apart piece by piece. I pictured my father sitting quietly in a dim corner, methodically breaking down whatever he'd found, separating components with precision. Sometimes he'd remove tiny screws, other times he'd strip wires or carve away sections to fit a pattern only he understood. They believed he followed a very specific routine, almost like a ritual. Every few days, he'd leave the house with a small bag or container, walk around certain streets, and gather the same kinds of objects. Over months, maybe even years, he'd collected hundreds of these pieces, always returning home to work on them. They suggested this pattern wasn't random or haphazard. It was consistent, methodical, and purposeful. As the detectives laid out what they thought they'd uncovered, a cold knot formed in my stomach. The man I thought I knew, the father I grew up with, had been living a secret life beyond just what was inside these walls. The idea that he spent hours outside, hunting for these items and then dismantling them, made me feel both confused and deeply unsettled. Why? For what purpose? And how had I never noticed this before? I felt a swirl of emotions, betrayal, sadness, fear, all tangled up with a strange urge to understand. It was as if a whole hidden side of him had been invisible to me, and now it was staring me in the face, raw and undeniable. Then one of the detectives leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice. "What we found inside the house," he began, "it's disturbing, yes. But the activities he was involved in outside? They're far worse." My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might give away the panic I was trying to hide. We're still piecing it all together, but what he was doing beyond these walls, what he was dismantling and collecting, could change everything. They left the sentence hanging there, the weight of it pressing down like a shadow I couldn't shake. Far worse than what was inside the house. The words echoed, but the truth behind them remained just out of reach, waiting for the next step, a step I wasn't sure I could take. I never imagined the truth about my father would crash down on me like this, unraveling years of half-remembered moments and quiet suspicions. Now looking back, I see his strange behaviors not as quirks or annoyances, but as pieces of a puzzle I was too blind to even notice before. The nights he came home exhausted, brushing off questions with a tired smile. The unexplained trips he took, sometimes vanishing for days with no clear reason. And that locked workshop, always a source of frustration and curiosity, a place I was forbidden to enter, no matter how much I begged. It wasn't until the discovery that everything began to fit together. The dusty notebooks hidden behind false panels, the blueprints and cryptic notes in his handwriting, the strange devices scattered among the clutter, it all painted a picture I could never have imagined. My father wasn't just a man who liked to tinker, he was guarding something far greater, something that demanded secrecy and sacrifice. The lock on the workshop wasn't just to keep me out, it was to protect a world I wasn't ready to see. I remember the evenings when he'd sit staring at the faint glow of his desk lamp, his face drawn tight with worry. At the time, I thought he was simply tired from work, but now I realize he was carrying a burden, one he never shared. There were times when I heard muffled voices through the walls, or glimpsed shadows moving in the dark, and I chalked it up to my imagination. But now I understand those were moments when his secret life collided with the ordinary, moments I was never meant to witness. And yet, even with all that I've uncovered, there are still gaps, holes in the story that refuse to close. For every answer, a dozen new questions arise. What was he truly protecting? Who else knew? Why did he choose to hide this from the family, from me, the one person who might have helped? It's like the man I thought I knew was only a fraction of the whole, a mask worn to shield us from dangers I'm only beginning to grasp. There's a particular memory that haunts me now, a late night when I was sure I heard the workshop door creak open, just for a moment. I rushed to see, but the hallway was empty, and the door was locked tight again. Did he leave something behind? Or was it a warning, a sign that even now, long after he's gone, the secrets are still alive, still waiting? Part of me wants to believe I've found everything, that the past has finally been laid bare. But deep down, I know that's not true. Even today, as I sift through the remnants of his life, I wonder if he hid more than just objects. Did he hide truths too dangerous to surface? And if so, will I ever be brave enough, or wise enough, to find them? The shadow of doubt lingers, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. I don't know if he hid everything, or if something is still missing. Something that could change everything once again. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I realize it's not an easy one to hear, and it's not comfortable to sit with the uncertainty that remains. But that's the reality I live with, and I wanted to share it honestly and openly. The questions I have now don't come with simple answers, and I don't pretend to have them all. What I do know is that facing the unknown is part of moving forward, even if it means carrying some weight that never fully lifts. If you found this story meaningful or thought-provoking, I invite you to subscribe to Under the Same Roof. It's a space where stories like this one, real, complex, and grounded in the human experience, are told with care and respect. Each episode aims to explore the psychological layers behind true crime, focusing not only on what happened but on how it affects those left behind. By subscribing, you'll be able to join a community of listeners who value honest conversations about difficult subjects. Also, if you stayed until the very end, I ask you to leave a comment saying, "I'm still watching." It's a small way to acknowledge your time and attention, and it helps build a connection between us. Knowing that there are people who listen all the way through encourages me to keep sharing these stories, and it reminds me we're not alone in facing the complexities of life and loss. I want to be clear that the goal here isn't to sensationalize or exploit pain. This is about understanding and bearing witness. It's about recognizing that behind every case, every headline, there are human beings with stories that don't always fit neatly into a narrative. Sometimes, the truth remains elusive, and sometimes closure is not something we find but something we create for ourselves. As I continue to reflect on what might still be hidden, I also acknowledge the limits of what I can uncover. Some things may never come to light, and that's a reality I have to accept. But sharing this with you allows me to process it a bit more openly, and maybe in some way, it helps others who have experienced similar doubts or unanswered questions. We all hold pieces of our past that feel incomplete, and sometimes knowing others understand that can be a form of comfort. So thank you again for listening and for being part of this journey. Your presence matters, and your willingness to engage with these stories means more than I can say. If you want to hear more stories that dig into the psychological dimensions of true crime, subscribe to Under the Same Roof and be part of the conversation. And don't forget to comment, "I'm still watching," if you made it to the end. It's a simple gesture, but it carries significance. I appreciate your time, your attention, and your willingness to listen. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.